But first, Australia has long supported a two-state solution to the Palestinian issue, but with this vital qualification that any Palestinian state must recognise Israel's right to exist behind secure borders. That's the problem with Penny Wong's rogue proposal to unilaterally recognise Palestine and to mandate an immediate ceasefire with Hamas, still in control of much of Gaza. Effectively, it rewards Hamas for its barbaric assault on October 7 and hands a massive victory to a terrorist group totally pledged to the complete and utter destruction of Israel and a new genocide of Jews from the river to the sea. Indeed, that offensive genocidal phase is still being used by the pro-Palestinian lobby in Australia as recently as last week. Nasser Mashini is the president of the Australia-Palestine Advocacy Network. And this post on the 2nd of April proudly declares, "Get out, get loud and be proud, 6 months since the genocide began." 6 months since the genocide began. Now, that's a clear attempt to infer that Israel started this war without provocation, when we know it was Israel that was attacked and her 1,200 innocent civilians murdered that triggered, at international law, Israel's right to self-defence.
Zionists want us to feel hopeless. The images we've seen from Al-Shifa have devastated us all. Gaza won't give up, neither must we. This weekend we march and we rally again. 6 months of genocide must stop. We are winning. The facade of civility that Israel has sold to the world has been shattered. It is impossible to defend this genocide, and those doing so are far less comfortable than ever before. There is a real and powerful anger, not just here but globally, at what Zionism is doing to Palestinians. Our job is to direct and focus that energy until this cruel and genocidal ideology comes to an end. Find your rally this weekend. Be there, get loud, get proud. From the river to the sea, my friends, Palestine will be free. And don't forget, Francesca sends her love.
The genocide is slaughtering on October 7 men, women, children, old people, babies, in the name of religion. Now ask yourself this question: if a terrorist group from New Zealand, say, had butchered without mercy over 3,000 Australians and taken more than 600 of us hostage, because that's what it would be on a proportionate basis, well, would we be squeamish about a retaliation that potentially involved the risk of civilian casualties, especially if the terrorists were deliberately hiding behind civilians, because civilian deaths were always part of the terrorist plan to undermine and ultimately destroy the Jewish state? Now, I doubt we would, because Australians would rightly demand their government do whatever they could in their power to protect Australians. Every civilian death is regrettable. Every civilian death is a death that lawful soldiers and good governments wish did not happen. But sober heads must prevail. We must all understand that in war, dreadful things happen, and that more often than not, mistakes are made. Now, do you think there were no civilians ever killed in error by Australian troops in war? Even in recent conflicts in Afghanistan, in Iraq, when chasing down Islamic State, civilian lives were lost. Regrettable, yes. Unexpected, sadly, no. But that is very different than what happened on October 7, when a terror organisation crossed into another country to slaughter its civilians in cold blood quite deliberately in order to spark the retaliation in the conflict we're all watching now. It was Palestinians that refused to allow Israelis to live safely behind secure borders. But yet Penny Wong now expects Israel to put down its arms and give the Palestinians a safe nation state, the right to exist that the Arabs have never given Israel. Penny Wong's intervention in this debate last night smacks of rank politics.
One is that the government actually has no intention of following through and prematurely recognising unilaterally a Palestinian state, in which case Penny Wong is irresponsibly playing to a domestic political audience on a hugely sensitive international security issue, or they genuinely do intend to break with decades of bipartisan policy in Australia on Israel-Palestine.
And look, Wong's intervention is not just about the politics of the hard left who have all come to hate Israel. but also the brutal politics of vote chasing inside Labor, where there's nothing they will not do, no principle they'll not squander to get and hold power. If you listen to the Albanese government, you would think that Israel was denying the loss of the 7-8 workers. Now, nothing could be further from the truth. 2 Israeli officers found guilty of failing to follow standard procedures that resulted in these drone strike deaths, well, they've already been sacked. And many may well also be criminally charged by the Israelis themselves. Indeed, Israel has been far quicker than we've ever been to investigate and take action against possible war crimes. As the whole Brereton process has shown, we take years to admit there might have been a problem. And we take even more years to investigate it. Then we take years more again to assess it. And even now, we're leaving accused Australian soldiers in a legal limbo. Arguably, that's an injustice. And that's where we are. And yet we criticise Israel. Why is the accidental killing of an Australian aid worker that's produced an almost immediate apology and deep contrition from the Israelis an enormity, especially when you set it against the way Australia has handled what were allegedly deliberate killings by our own military? Now, just as bad is the Prime Minister's double standard when it comes to our own killed in this latest Middle East conflict. Where was the phone call from the Prime Minister to his Israeli counterpart when the Australian Gilad Carboni was slaughtered by Hamas operatives on October 7? Why did Wong refuse to visit the scene of her murder when she was in Israel in January? Why is one accidental death at the hands of the Israeli military a justification for upending years of bipartisan support for Israel when a deliberate murder by Hamas sparked no outrage or specific outrage from the government? Again, the only explanation is Labor's double standard, that an accidental killing by Israel is a monstrosity, but a deliberate killing by Hamas is just what we'd expect from a terror group. Now, I get that the government can readily protest to the Israelis in a way it can't to Hamas, and that Israelis take our protests seriously in ways that Hamas never will. Still, a moral standard that's not equally applied, well, that's no moral standard at all. And this has everything to do with politics, almost nothing to do with any real moral failing by the Israeli state. The fact that the Foreign Minister, seemingly with the support of other senior ministers, has seized upon this tragic mistake as a justification for giving the enemies of Israel a massive propaganda victory shows 2 things. First, that current ministers in the government, either from the perceived electoral politics of Western Sydney or from a Marxist sympathy, the hard left love this, with supposedly oppressed people who can do no wrong against their supposed oppressors, no longer accepts that there's much moral difference between Israel and Hamas, even though one is a terror group and the other is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East. And the second, that this government is incapable of maintaining a consistent position for more than a couple of weeks. In the aftermath of October 7, the Albanese government was clear. They said this was a Hamas attack and an atrocity, that hostages must be returned and that Hamas must be destroyed. Now it's Israel, they say, that needs to be punished because it's been unable to avoid the civilian casualties that are inevitable in urban warfare and that Hamas has exacerbated. The Israeli government's made a dreadful mistake in the prosecution of a just war. Fair enough. By contrast, the Australian government is guilty of moral posturing to play politics. There is no other Western nation prepared to recognise a Palestinian state as Australia appears ready to do. And the race to recognise a new country run by a listed terrorist organisation, well, by God, that is not a race Australia should ever want to win.